crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com, and today I have a card featuring some alcohol inks on transparency for a fun see-through card technique. So I actually recorded this video almost 2 years ago, but I have kind of gone through and tried to remember everything that I did. It's just one of those like lost footage videos, and I have a few of those that'll probably be coming up. So I started with a piece of transparency about the size of the front of an A2 size card, so about 4¼ by 5½. And I'm applying my alcohol ink. Alcohol inks work well on non-porous surfaces like transparencies and Yupo paper, etc. So I had to go through my collection of alcohol inks and take a best guess at which ones I use. I believe this is the purple Twilight. But basically I was trying to create the look of a night sky, but kind of in a sort of like fantastical way, not in like a sort of super accurate way. So I'm slowly building up the color, and I am dabbing as opposed to swiping. You can swipe alcohol inks and get the look of like lines across your alcohol ink, which looks really cool sometimes. And I would use that technique at times, but this time I wanted this more of like a mottled look, like M-O-T-T. I don't know how to spell that word either. I don't know, but like a sort of a spotted look as opposed to a smooth look. You could also just kind of let the alcohol inks just spread and do their thing, but I thought that was like too splotchy for what I was going for. But I also kind of made it up as I went along, because when I first started, I thought I was going to do a lot more purple, but then the purples weren't turning out quite the way I had envisioned, and I wanted to add something darker. So I went with the black alcohol ink, which is called Pitch Black, and I started layering that on. I wanted it to fade into the purple, which I will say, to get the alcohol inks to look like they were sort of blending together from one to the next was definitely a tricky process and involved layering quite a bit. So, I would put down some black and then put down some purple and then put down some black. I think I finally realized that I should combine them on the felt pad. So when you apply alcohol inks, you can put the alcohol inks directly on the surface you're working on, or you can apply them to the felt applicator. And so that's what I eventually figured out was the easier thing to do in this case. So I put a couple drops of each on that little piece of felt, that little rectangle of felt there. And then I continued to dab it on and get that blend. Now, if you ever get to the point where like a part of your alcohol ink is just not turned out the way you want, you can remove alcohol ink, and you can remove it using rubbing alcohol essentially. Now it occurs to me I must be using 2 different purples, so I will try to link the second purple because I see that I have 3 bottles there. I'll try to figure out which one that one was, but I would just use whichever ones you like. And then I'm going to add a bit of a blue to fade the sky into. Again, this is not so much an accurate as opposed to a fantastical sort of pretty background. And I'm going to be combining this with the Lawn Fawn Firefly stamp set. So I'm definitely going for that sort of like sunset time of the day, right when the fireflies first start coming out. The blue, I believe, is the Sailboat Blue alcohol ink. And again, I want to make sure it mixes with the purple. I don't want everything to be too opaque because I am going to be trying to take advantage of the fact that it's transparent. So I'm working on a clear piece of transparency, but alcohol inks are not opaque. They are in fact see-through as well. And if you're working on a surface that's see-through, you can get that effect. So here are the Lawn Fawn Fireflies all stamped out. I'm going to color them. I basically looked up what fireflies really look like, which kind of surprised me. They have these sort of pink bodies, and the Lawn Fawn stamp set includes the back and front of the fireflies. So that's again why I chose to do this look of like transparency and see-through, because I'm going to have the front of the fireflies on the front of the card. And then when you open the card, you're going to see the back of the fireflies, and you're going to be able to see through the background that they're on. So hopefully it will be a fun effect. I actually made this card with my mom in mind. I just really thought she would appreciate the fun, bright colors of it. And so this is, like I said, a very old recording. And so I have since given it to her, and she did like it quite a bit. So I'm coloring the wings with BG10 and B000. I am doing some pretty basic shading, but in all honesty, this is probably too much effort I put into coloring these. Like, I color their little tiny bottoms a little light on them with like 3 different colors of yellow, which, I mean, it's such a small area. 2 colors probably would have been fine. So I have Y11, 13, and 18 there. And I'm going to be coloring the body with a black color. Or, well, I want it to look black, so I'm going to be coloring it with my W markers. Very rarely do you actually want to use the Copic black marker, as many of you are aware. So I'm going to use W7, 5, and 3 to blend out, to get a really dark gray that will read as black without being too solid and actually have a bit of shading. So while I do like the way that all this shading turned out, it was a fair amount of work for these really tiny images, and coloring them in a solid color would probably look pretty good too, or maybe just using a 2-color blend. I use my never-ending rectangle dies from Cat Scrappiness to cut out a window out of the front of my card. So this is a standard A2 size card. And I also cut a frame that was slightly smaller. So instead of being 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, it was more like 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, or something just tiny, just a bit tinier. And then I cut the same rectangle out of it so that I could line up that frame. And that means that when I attach the back, where I attach the transparency to the window, ordinarily you would see the adhesive through the transparency, but I wanted it to have a cleaner look. So I'm going to put the transparency on the back of the frame, like on the back of the card that has the frame. And then I'm going to put this other rectangle piece, which I guess also you could call a frame, on it as well. So I actually attach my transparency to that extra rectangular piece. Then I'm going to line it up with the front of my card. And that way all of the like sort of rough edges are going to be covered by the pieces of cardstock. And it will give it a more clean, finished look. And I hope it's clear. I don't think I was very good with words in terms of explaining that, but hopefully you can see from the recording how I was able to create the background. So once I had that established, I was ready to add my sentiment. I wanted to put my sentiment directly on the transparency piece. So I am going to actually stamp it with some VersaMark ink, and then I'm going to heat emboss it with white. I did want to, before I started, think about where I would put my fireflies, how many fireflies I wanted, so that I knew exactly where to put my sentiment. I thought about making the fireflies look like they were like flying more sporadically around, but I really didn't like the upside down firefly, so I don't wind up using that idea. This is the sentiment from that teeny tiny little firefly stamp set. I like using just a single stamp set on many cards to kind of, I have a lot of stamp sets, but when I'm sharing in a video, I like to show you what to do with just a single stamp set. So plus that sentiment's pretty fun. It says, hope your day glows with happiness, a very great general sentiment. And that's how I kind of wound up sending this card to my mom, not for any specific occasion, just to brighten her day. Now, because this is a little bit transparent, you can see through the alcohol ink, you will see your sentiment on the inside of the card, and you could possibly add another like layer of cardstock to hide that, but I didn't really mind the look of showing the sentiment through there. And then when you heat emboss the transparency, it can melt the plastic of the transparency. So I think it's important to have your heat gun nice and hot and ready to go, and apply a little bit of heat on both sides. and don't bring the heat gun too close to the transparency to try to prevent some of that stuff, or try to prevent some of that warping specifically. So I colored up a whole bunch of fireflies, and in the end I was quite happy that I did, because I did want to really cover the card and make it a lot of the ideas that I saw when this Firefly stamp set first came out was like making jars of fireflies, and so including lots of fireflies. And I kind of wanted to have that jar feel, like in terms of it being just like really full and bright. But especially with the transparency, because that kind of mimics the jar, the glass jar look as well. So that was just kind of like why I decided to go with 5 fireflies instead of just, 2 or 3. And I'm lining up. I did die cut these with the die. This was because the dies are so cheap for these smaller stamp sets. Sometimes it's nice to get them. And so I did line up the back and front of all of the fireflies. And so that is it for my card today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're interested in more craft tutorials, be sure to subscribe to my channel. I will leave you links to all of the products that I used in the video description below. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.